All right, we're diving into the life of Steve Jobs. Isaacson's biography. Wow, there's a lot to unpack, but let's see what we can find.
It's going to be fun to dig into those lesser-known stories, the stuff you don't usually hear about.
Yeah, it's so interesting how this book goes way beyond just calling him a genius, you know? We really get to see the complexities of the guy, good and bad, like the stuff that drove him to achieve so much, but also led to some, shall we say, interesting management choices.
So true. Okay, let's start at the beginning. Isaacson really paints this vivid picture of Jobs' childhood. His adoptive parents, Paul and Clara, they instilled this deep appreciation for good craftsmanship, which is pretty obvious in his later work. But here's the thing, those weekend trips to junkyards, they weren't just about finding spare parts for whatever project, right? Right. What's fascinating is how those trips actually taught Jobs about value, like really understanding what something was worth. Isaacson talks about how Paul Jobs could just look at something and know if it was a good deal, often knowing more than the people selling the stuff.
Wow, imagine a young Steve Jobs, like, haggling over scrap metal. Talk about entrepreneurial training right there. It's almost like those junkyard trips planted the seed for that classic Apple outsider mentality, that blend of we're making premium stuff, but we're also kind of rebellious and doing our own thing.
Definitely. And this whole thing about understanding value, it wasn't just about like physical objects. It totally influenced how Jobs approached ideas and innovation later on. He got comfortable looking for inspiration in unexpected places, kind of like those junkyards, right?
Yeah. And speaking of unexpected influences, there's that whole thing with Eastern spirituality and Jobs. It wasn't just a phase, it had a real impact.
Oh, totally. His interest in Zen Buddhism, especially the book Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind, it really had a profound influence on him, especially his sense of aesthetics. Think about it. That emphasis on simplicity, on minimalism, that became a core part of Apple's design language. Clean lines, easy-to-use interfaces, focusing on what's essential. It's like that Zen influence is woven right in.
It's true. When you look at it that way, that whole Zen approach, it wasn't just about making things look nice, right? It was about getting rid of anything unnecessary to get to the heart of what really mattered.
Exactly. Clarity and purpose, both in design and in life itself. It resonated with Jobs on a deep level. He didn't just want to make things look cool. He wanted them to make sense.
It's amazing how all these seemingly random things, haggling for car parts, meditating, and studying Zen philosophy, came together to make Steve Jobs who he was. And it really helps us understand the man behind those incredible innovations.
And speaking of Jobs, we got to talk about this reality distortion field, right? This reality distortion field. It sounds like something straight out of Star Wars. Are you telling me this guy could, like, actually bend reality to his will?
Well, not telekinesis or anything, but I can see why people said that. It was this uncanny ability Jobs had to make people believe the impossible was possible.
So more like extreme persuasion then.
Exactly.
Right.
He could get his team to achieve some pretty amazing, almost unbelievable things. Like that story about him convincing Steve Wozniak to create the game Braid Out in. Get this, just 4 days. 4 days? For a whole video game? That's insane. Wozniak must have been up all night, every night.
Yeah, and the thing is, even Wozniak thought it was impossible at first. But Jobs, he wouldn't back down. He pushed and pushed with this total conviction, and somehow Wozniak actually did it. It's a perfect example of that reality distortion field in action.
So that distortion field, it was kind of essential to Apple's innovation. But I can see how it might have caused some, well, let's just say tension sometimes.
Totally. That intensity, the need to blow past everyone's expectations, it definitely fueled Jobs' demanding leadership style. He set the bar incredibly high, and his pursuit of perfection, well, it often led to clashes with his team.
Makes you think about the human side of innovation, you know? All that passion, that drive. You can have a downside too, but you can't argue with the results. Apple products, they became famous for being so elegant, so user-friendly. And that kind of leads us to another interesting thing about Jobs. He was obsessed with simplicity.
Oh, absolutely fixated on it, both in the design and in how people actually use the products. Jobs believed that the very best product should be obvious to use right off the bat using familiar things that people already understand.
You know, it's funny you mention that because when I think about those early Macs, I think about how revolutionary that desktop idea was. Just brilliant.
Exactly. Jobs was all about creating a digital experience that felt natural, intuitive. He'd spend hours, even days, just obsessing over the tiniest details. Isaacson talks about how Jobs spent like ages just agonizing over the look of the Macintosh title bar, something most people wouldn't even notice.
Wow. Talk about attention to detail.
Yeah.
But it makes sense, in a way. Jobs knew that all those little things, they added up to create the overall experience.
Mm.
And that dedication to simplicity, to making things easy to use, it became a key part of what made Apple products stand out.
It wasn't just about making things simple for the sake of it, though. It was about making them understandable, even enjoyable.
Exactly. It's like he wanted to remove any barrier between the person and the tech. And that desire for control, it went beyond just how the products looked and worked, didn't it? Jobs wanted to shape the whole Apple experience, the entire ecosystem. And that brings us to that interesting tension between control and openness.
Jobs' desire for control, it was a double-edged sword for sure. People admired it and criticized it. Like when he went head-to-head with those record labels over iTunes pricing, he just refused to compromise on his vision.
Those negotiations with Time Warner about magazine subscriptions on the iPad, legendary.
Exactly. Jobs wanted to call the shots, to carefully craft the whole experience from top to bottom. He really believed in Apple's walled garden, where the company controls everything about what apps and content are available to their users.
And that whole walled garden approach, people are still debating that one. So, on the one hand, Jobs' control definitely played a huge role in Apple's success. But it also made some people nervous about being locked in, about not having enough freedom or flexibility. What are your thoughts on that whole thing?
It's definitely complicated. There are good points on both sides. Jobs' control, for all its downsides, it did ensure a certain level of quality and consistency. But yeah, it came at the expense of users having total freedom and maybe even stifled some competition. But whether you agree with it or not, that control is a big part of his legacy.
It's kind of wild how that need for control, for creating this very specific experience, played out on such a massive scale. You know, reading Isaacson's book, what really got me was how much Jobs' personality shines through, even in those little details. Like that whole thing with him obsessing over the title bar just makes you wonder how much of him is actually in every Apple product, you know?
That's what's so cool about this deep dive. It's not just about the techie stuff. It's about the person behind it all, all the good and the not so good. And Isaacson doesn't hold back on those tougher parts of Jobs' personality either.
No, he definitely doesn't sugarcoat it. We get this very human picture of Jobs. The genius is there, the drive, but also those flaws, that demanding way of leading, those blow-ups. It makes you think about the cost of that kind of relentless innovation.
It really does. It raises those questions about, what's the price of being that driven? Jobs, he was a visionary, no doubt. But he could be incredibly tough to work with, pushed people to their absolute limits, sometimes even further, even when he came back to Apple, after being forced out, after battling cancer.
Isaacson says his first day back was basically just one tantrum after another. Can you imagine being there? Talk about intense.
Really shows you how complex he was. That genius, it came with this intensity, this almost ruthless drive that was just a part of him. You got to see both sides to really understand the guy,
Totally. It's a good reminder that even icons like Steve Jobs, they're human with all the same complexities and contradictions as the rest of us. So after looking at all of this, his early life, his personality, his ideas about design, his need for control, what would you say is his biggest impact? What lasts?
Well, Jobs definitely left his mark on tech, on design, on our whole culture, really. He challenged the way things were always done, pushed those boundaries, and showed the world that tech could be useful and beautiful. It's hard to imagine, life without the stuff he helped create. The iPhone, the iPad, the Mac, they're just dot everywhere.
It's true. The way we talk to each other, work, even just have fun, it's all different because of those devices.
Yeah.
And I think even more than the products themselves, Jobs' legacy is about the power of vision, like being able to see what's next and just going for it, even when no one else gets it.
That's a really important point. It's about having the guts to be different, to shake things up, to believe in what you see, even when it seems impossible to everyone else.
This whole deep dive has given me so much to think about. And it's not just the gadgets and technology, it's the person behind it all, the drive, the passion, the flaws, everything. It reminds you that big innovations can come from anywhere, and that even the most brilliant minds are shaped by their experiences.
And that's what makes this kind of exploration so interesting, right? It's not just about what we've talked about. It's about those connections you're making in your own head, the questions you're asking yourself. So as you go about your day, think about how Jobs' story connects with you. What surprised you? What made you rethink things? What will you take away from this whole journey into his life and work?
It's been a fascinating look into the world of Steve Jobs. A world of crazy innovation, intense personalities, and, let's be honest, more than a few surprises. And hey, who knows, maybe his story will inspire you to find your own reality distortion field and shake things up a bit yourself. Thanks for joining us.